Blaming Brian is over? Yesterday afternoon, I got 2 phone calls. One was from my attorney letting me know that he had sent Brian a cease and desist, and had sent the leasing company a letter asking them to remove me from the lease on the grounds that Brian had been abusive, etc. The other was from my leasing agent to inform me about an emergency with Brian. At first, I didn't answer her call. I let it go to voicemail. She then texted me that an emergency had happened with Brian and that I needed to call her now. As it turns out, Brian had no emergency contact listed on his leasing application. I was not aware of this. Even though Brian and I were on pretty okay terms when we moved into the house, I still put my mom down as my emergency contact. It stands to reason that someone in your immediate family should be at least one of your emergency contacts, just in case. Brian, unfortunately, did not think this way. I was the only one they had a number for to call. So I called her back. She proceeded to inform me that Brian was in an ambulance on the way to the hospital. While the owner of the house and her friend were there fixing the house, he had stopped breathing. She couldn't tell me anything else because that was all she knew as well. My first instinct was to go to the house because his dog was going to be there by herself, and I didn't want that. So I did, and the house owner and her friend were still there. House owner's friend is a nurse and explained to me in a very detailed way what had happened. He was fine when they got there. He had told them he wasn't feeling well, that he thought he had the flu, and that he had taken a bunch of Dayquil. Not long after they started working in the bathroom, they said they could hear him start to breathe heavily, then start to snore. By the time they had finished, they couldn't hear him snoring anymore, so they thought he was awake and watching TV or something. They came out of the bathroom to let him know they were done, and he didn't respond to them. Nurse friend said she went up to him and shook him a little, and he still didn't respond. She realized he wasn't breathing and immediately started CPR, which she did until the ambulance came. She said that when she was doing CPR, he reeked of alcohol. The paramedics used the paddles on him, which he also didn't respond to. I'm assuming they worked on him all the way to the hospital, and even after he got to the hospital, I think he had already passed before they even got him in the ambulance. I took care of the pups and then headed straight to the hospital. I knew he was gone. Sometimes you just know things. You feel it in the very core of your being, but it still doesn't make it easier to have the nurse ask the family of your deceased ex if you can join them in the chapel. It still doesn't make it easier to have said nurse tell you, before you go in, you should know that he didn't make it. It still doesn't make it easier to hear the wails of your ex FSEL when she sees the body of her brother on a table in an emergency room suite. That feeling, that knowing, doesn't make it easier to experience. I couldn't look at him like that. I took half a step in, and my instincts were screaming white hot, telling me to leave and not look at him. But then again, I have always been that way. I couldn't look at my AG teacher. I couldn't look at my grandparents. I couldn't look at Brian. I saw his chin and the breathing tube they had in his mouth and couldn't continue on. Just that small sight kept me up all night last night. Meanwhile, awesome new guy texted me while he was at work. He asked how my day was going, not knowing what I was doing at the time. I said, well, my day started out well, but some things happened today that I don't really feel comfortable texting, and that, quite frankly, I don't know how to talk about. I am fine. You and I are fine. But things are probably going to be weird for me for a while. He immediately walked out of work and called me. Have you ever had to tell your current boyfriend that you are at the hospital with your ex's family because some weird shit happened and he died? There is no script for that. I just word vomited it all out. He listened, said that he was so sorry, and said that he just wanted to make sure I was okay. He had to get back to work, but promised to come over after he was done. Anyway, his brother and youngest younger sister were the only two there with me at the hospital. They said that their parents and oldest younger sister were on their way from Brian's hometown, that they were meeting at youngest younger sister's house, and that I could meet them there if I wanted. By this time, it was almost 6, and Brian was already in the care of the medical examiner to determine cause of death. My sister and I are speculating liver failure, but it is uncertain as of now. So I went back to my place, fed, and took the pups out, and sat and waited for youngest younger sister to text me her address. While I was waiting, I called his best friend. I wouldn't have felt right if I didn't. He was shocked, of course, but made the comment, well, he wasn't really the best at taking care of himself. I don't think he really knew what to feel. He told me to keep him updated as I knew what was going on. I also went by George's house and talked to him for a second. I think we are going to get together and talk sometime this weekend or next week. He too was shocked and a bit angry, but not surprised. He said that when Brian told him of my abrupt departure, the first thought he had was how happy he was for me. He said that it got to a point where he had to be with Brian, or he would be blowing up his phone with depressing stuff or accusing him of being with me. I told him that that was what I had dealt with for almost 4 years, so I understood how taxing it could be. He said that he suggested that Brian get a therapist because he couldn't handle having the life sucked out of him like that, and that he had been dodging Brian's texts for about a week. He feels guilty that he wasn't a better friend, but we both know it wasn't either of our faults. Youngest younger sister finally texted me at about 7:15 last night and told me her address. She also asked if I could bring Brian's phone, wallet, and keys along with his dog and her food and stuff. I said of course and went to the house to grab that stuff. When I pulled up, there was a big white truck parked out front. The porch light and the garage motion light were not on, so I walked up to the door in the dark with my key in my hand, ready to stab a bitch. Turns out, it was Brian's friend, Grant, not his real name. He said that he saw on Facebook about his passing, and that he didn't really know what he was doing there. He and Brian were supposed to hang out that night, but he couldn't get a hold of him. He said that he wanted to come and check to see if the house was okay, and if someone had come to take care of his pup. I told him that I had it covered, and that I had his dog with me in my car. He told me to let him know if I needed anything, and I told him to do the same. When I got to youngest older sister's house, the whole family was there. Before I left my apartment, I prepared a note for them. I outlined how to feed the pup, I wrote down his phone passcode, and wrote a list of friends of his that I wasn't sure they had thought to contact. I honestly expected to drop off the pup, her stuff, and Brian's things and just bounce. But they welcomed me in, and we talked for a while. They were thankful that I had thought to write down some details. We talked about final arrangements, and songs to play at his funeral and who he would want to be pallbearers, and lots of other extremely uncomfortable things. Then, as if things couldn't have gotten any worse, the people from the organ donation place in my state called. We all knew he was an organ, eye, and tissue donor. We talked about it quite often, actually. The lady on the phone said that they needed to do a medical questionnaire, so his mom, oldest younger sister, and I, at their request, stepped into the bedroom to answer the questions. I was a little glad I was there, because they didn't know his address or a lot of his recent medical history. The questions were pretty generic at first, then they got to the heavy stuff. 2 questions will forever be burned into my mind. The first was, did Brian ever use any illegal drugs, such as cocaine, heroin, acid, or marijuana? His parents obviously know that he smokes a shit ton of weed, but I looked at his mom after she said yes, and she mouthed, "More?" To which I just nodded. He had done everything at least once. I didn't elaborate on that though. The second was, in the last 5 years, did Brian have sexual contact with another male? His mom said, no. And I said louder, yes. His mom and sister's eyes grew wide, and they both just stared at me for a second. I just folded my arms and nodded. When the call ended, I apologized. I said, I know that was probably hard to hear, and I know you didn't want or need to know that about him. They said that it was okay, and that the organ donation center needed to know that. They also requested that that information not leave that room, to which I said, absolutely. After that whole ordeal, I went home. I had to take care of my pup, and awesome new guy was coming over. He is and has been fucking amazing through all this, by the way. He is so kind and caring and supportive, and I cannot believe I got so lucky. They said that they would update me, and I hope that they do. I will be going over with his family at some point this weekend to let them in the house to get the rest of his stuff. They informed me that they weren't going to be taking everything, just his personal belongings, so I have no fucking clue what to do with the stuff they don't take. I guess I could donate the furniture if they don't take it, but I don't know about the rest. I am so lost. I am so angry. I don't know how to process any of this. I don't know what to say or do. I don't know how to feel or what to think. My family was just glad that he and I weren't still together, and that I wasn't the one to find him that way. Because the fact that I was going to find him like that eventually had we stayed together was inevitable. I'm mostly glad that someone was there, because who knows how long he would have been there before someone did a welfare check on him. I am fortunate that we weren't married and didn't have any kids. Can you imagine being a 24-year-old widow and having to explain to your children how daddy more than likely drank himself to death at the ripe old age of 29? People have been reaching out to me like we were still together, sending me their condolences and telling me that they are here for me. It feels wrong to be grieving the way that I am. It felt wrong for me to be with his family at the hospital and wrong for me to be discussing his funeral arrangements. I always had a feeling that this would happen, but I didn't think it would be so soon. None of this feels remotely real. I don't feel responsible, because he was doing this to his body long before he and I were together. But it's hard to shake that compassion I still feel for him, and the sadness I feel now that he is gone. I always felt it was my job to care for him, even though I know that isn't what a partnership should be. He really didn't have anyone else. He held his family and friends further at arm's length than he did me, though. So I feel like the least I can do is be there for them until he is laid to rest, and the grieving process eases. I hate that Brian's final just no moment was his death, and having myself, his family, and his friends pick up the pieces and make arrangements and figure out what to do from here. I hate that he didn't take care of himself. I hate that he didn't want to get better, or even if he did, didn't get the chance to. I don't know where to go from here, but I do have an appointment with my therapist tomorrow afternoon, so we will see how it goes. Since Brian has passed, I would feel wrong to speak ill of the dead, and I don't really have any good stories about him. Hopefully the funeral and all other matters go smoothly. Thank you all for your support over the last couple years, on my previous account and this one. You guys have no idea how much easier you have made things for me since the very beginning of this saga.